My name is Eleanor Hale, and the night I stayed alone in the stable after dark is the night everything I thought I knew about silence, fear, and companionship came undone. I didn't mean to be brave. I didn't mean to be reckless either. I just meant to finish one last thing before locking up, to smooth the edge of a day that had already scraped me raw. The sun had dropped fast, as it always does in early autumn, and the sky outside the barn doors had gone the color of bruised plums by the time I realized how late it was. The lights inside the stable hummed weakly, casting long, trembling shadows that stretched like they wanted to escape the walls. I had always hated that hour, the in-between, not day, not night, the hour where memories feel louder than footsteps and every sound carries too much meaning. The stable smelled like hay and old wood and something warm and alive. Horses breathe differently at night, slower, deeper, like the world finally stops asking them to perform. I told myself I'd been alone plenty of times before. I told myself fear was just a habit I hadn't broken yet. But that night, fear felt like a presence. His stall was at the far end, where the lights dimmed into shadow. I hadn't planned on stopping there. I never did. Not because he was dangerous, not in the way people usually mean, but because something about him felt unfinished, like a sentence that stopped mid-thought. The first time I saw him weeks earlier, he hadn't even lifted his head. A dark bay with a rough, uneven mane, and eyes that looked like they were always listening to something far away. No name on the stall card, just a number and a red tag that meant temporary, uncertain, unclaimed. Unwanted. I hated how much I recognized myself in that. That night, my boots echoed louder than they should have as I walked past the empty stalls. Each step felt like an announcement, like I was interrupting something private. The barn groaned softly, wood settling, metal ticking as it cooled. Somewhere outside, an owl cried, sharp and sudden, and my chest tightened before I could stop it. I almost turned back. I would have, if I hadn't heard him shift his weight. It wasn't loud, just the soft rustle of straw and the low exhale of breath. But it grounded me, pulled me forward the way gravity pulls a dropped glass toward shattering. I stopped outside his stall. For a moment, neither of us moved. The shadows hid most of him, but I could see the pale slash of his blaze catching what little light reached that far. One ear flicked toward me, then the other. He knew I was there. He always did. "I'm just checking," I whispered, though there was no one to hear me but him. "Just making sure everything's fine." My voice sounded thinner than I felt, or maybe thinner than I wanted to feel. I slid the latch open slowly, the metal click loud in the quiet. He lifted his head then, finally, and our eyes met. There was no startle, no tension in his neck, just awareness. As if he'd been waiting. That unsettled me more than if he'd spooked. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The air felt different in there, warmer, heavier, intimate in a way that made my skin prickle. His breathing filled the space, steady and deep, and for a moment, I matched my own to it without realizing. I told myself it was just a horse. But standing there, wrapped in the quiet rhythm of him, it felt like standing beside another heart that had learned how to be alone too well. I reached out slowly, palm open, stopping just short of touching him. He didn't move. His eye stayed on me, dark and reflective, like it was holding something back. "I know," I murmured. I didn't know what I meant, but the words felt right anyway. "I know." The first touch was almost nothing, just my fingers brushing the coarse warmth of his neck, but it sent something sharp and unexpected through me, like a memory waking up too fast. He didn't flinch. The relief that washed over me was disproportionate and immediate. My shoulders dropped. My breath loosened. I leaned my forehead briefly against the wooden rail and closed my eyes, letting the moment pass through me. I hadn't planned to stay, but I did. Time behaves strangely when you stop fighting it. Minutes stretch. Thoughts wander. I brushed him slowly, methodically, listening to the soft scrape of bristles and the sighs he let out as if each one was something he'd been carrying all day. The lights flickered once, then steadied, and the darkness beyond the stall felt thicker for it. I realized then how long it had been since I'd felt safe in a quiet place. My life had become a series of careful exits, leaving rooms before anyone noticed I was there. Leaving conversations unfinished, leaving memories untouched because they hurt too much when you lingered. But he didn't ask anything of me. He just stood there, solid and warm, reminding me with every breath that some things endure without explanation. I rested my hand against his shoulder and felt the power there, the restrained strength. It was humbling, comforting, terrifying in the way honesty always is. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the doors. The sound made me jump, and for the first time, his body tensed. Not much, just a subtle shift. But it was enough to remind me that fear doesn't disappear, it just changes shape. "It's okay," I said softly, more to myself than to him. "I've got you." The words surprised me as soon as they left my mouth, because no one had ever said them to me when I needed them most. I stayed longer than I should have, long enough for the world outside the stable to vanish entirely, long enough for the dark to stop feeling like an enemy and start feeling like a blanket. When the lights finally flickered again, more insistently this time, a jolt of awareness cut through me. I straightened, suddenly conscious of how late it had gotten, how alone I was. The barn fell into shadow. Not complete darkness, just enough light from the moon, slipping through high windows to turn everything silver and unfamiliar. My pulse quickened. The familiar shapes of the stable twisted into something else, something ancient and watchful. I froze. He shifted again, hooves rustling, and I felt the echo of it in my bones. For a moment, neither of us breathed. Then, slowly, deliberately, I placed my hand back on his neck. "I'm here," I whispered, the words shaking despite my effort. "I'm not going anywhere." And in the dark, with the stable holding its breath around us, I realized with a sinking certainty that staying had already changed something. I had come here thinking the mistake was being alone. I was wrong. The mistake was believing I could walk away unchanged. The night pressed in closer, and somewhere between his steady presence and my unraveling thoughts, the first crack appeared in the walls I'd built around myself. The night pressed in closer, and somewhere between his steady presence and my unraveling thoughts, the first crack appeared in the walls I'd built around myself. I felt it before I understood it, that subtle shift inside my chest, the way something I'd been holding rigid for years finally bent. Not broke, bent. Like a branch under too much snow. Still alive. Still attached. But changed. The darkness in the stable was no longer just the absence of light. It had weight, texture. It hummed softly, alive with the quiet sounds of bodies at rest and old structures breathing. I became acutely aware of how small I was inside it. How human, how easy it would be to disappear if I wanted to. But I didn't want to. My hand stayed on his neck, fingers curled slightly into his coat. He was warm in a way that felt deliberate, like he was offering it without knowing how. His breathing steadied again, long and slow, and I followed it the way you follow a tide when you're too tired to swim against it. I let my forehead rest against his shoulder this time, not the wooden rail. The contact sent a quiet shock through me, not fear, not surprise, just recognition, as if my body knew something my mind had spent years avoiding. I could feel his heart beneath the muscle and bone, powerful and patient. It beat without anxiety, without anticipation, just because it had to, because life required it. "I'm not supposed to be here this late," I whispered into his coat. The words felt like a confession. "I know that." The stable answered with a distant creak, the sound of wind brushing against old boards. Somewhere down the aisle, a horse snorted in its sleep. The world didn't collapse because I stayed. No alarm went off. No punishment arrived. He shifted his weight again, closer this time, and my breath caught. The space between us narrowed until there was no clear line where I ended and he began. I felt smaller and steadier all at once. It scared me how much I needed that. I hadn't meant to let myself need anything again. Need was what broke things. Need was what made you wait too long, hope too hard, trust the wrong hands. I'd learned that lesson early, learned it well. Independence had become my armor. Solitude, my language. And yet here I was, leaning into a living being who asked nothing of me except presence. The lights didn't come back on. At some point, I realized my phone was still in my locker at the front of the barn. The thought came with a spike of unease, sharp and immediate. No signal, no clock. No easy way to remind myself that time was still moving forward and not folding in on itself. The moonlight shifted, casting pale lines across the straw. His eye caught it, reflecting silver. He blinked slowly, and something about that small, unguarded motion unraveled me further. "You don't even have a name," I murmured. "Not one that sticks anyway." I'd heard the staff talk. He'd come in thin and silent, no papers that mattered, no clear history. Temporary turned into permanent neglect faster than anyone wanted to admit. People passed his stall without meaning to. Out of sight was easier than unresolved. I understood that too well. I reached up and brushed my thumb along the edge of his blaze. He didn't pull away. His eyelid fluttered, and he exhaled softly, a sound that felt like permission. Something inside me loosened. Memories surfaced uninvited late nights, in empty rooms, the echo of my own footsteps after everyone else had gone. Conversations I'd replayed until they lost meaning. The way silence had become both refuge and threat. I realized then that I wasn't just afraid of being alone in the stable. I was afraid of what happened when I wasn't. The sound of a door banging somewhere outside jolted me upright. My heart slammed against my ribs, loud enough that I was sure he could feel it. He startled this time, a sharper movement, muscles coiling beneath my hand. "It's okay," I said quickly, too loudly. I forced myself to breathe slower, deeper. "It's just the wind." But fear is contagious. I felt it ripple through him, a tremor I hadn't noticed before. His ears pinned back briefly, then flicked forward again as he reassessed the dark. I hated myself for bringing that into his space. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't mean to." I stopped. The words felt wrong, not because they weren't true, but because they came from an old script. Apologize, minimize, retreat. Instead, I stayed exactly where I was. My hand slid back to his neck, firmer now, intentional. I grounded myself in the simple reality of touch. Warmth. Weight. Breath. He calmed slowly, the tension bleeding out of his frame in degrees, not all at once. It reminded me that trust isn't a switch. It's a process, one you have to respect. "So am I," I said quietly, surprising myself. Scared, I mean. Admitting it felt like stepping off a ledge and discovering the ground was closer than you thought. The darkness didn't judge me for it, neither did he. Time stretched again, elastic and strange. I don't know how long we stood there, breathing in sync, listening to the night settle deeper around us. My legs grew stiff, my shoulders ached, but I didn't move, because moving felt like leaving, and leaving felt impossible. I thought about all the times I'd walked away from things before they could ask more of me. Jobs, places, people. I'd told myself it was strength, self-preservation, freedom. But standing there, with straw under my boots and a horse's quiet strength pressed against me, it felt more like avoidance. Like I'd been running from moments exactly like this, moments that asked me to stay present even when it was uncomfortable. The stable felt different now, not empty, not threatening, just old and watchful, like it had seen countless versions of this before humans and animals finding each other in the quiet hours, when pretenses fall away. My phone buzzed suddenly. The sound was jarringly loud, obscene in its normalcy. I jumped again, heart racing, fumbling in my jacket pocket before remembering it wasn't there. The vibration echoed faintly through the barn, a ghost of connection from somewhere else. Reality tugged at me, insistent. I needed to go. I knew that. Every rational part of me screamed it. Rules existed for reasons. Safety, liability, common sense. But my feet didn't move. Instead, I leaned closer, my forehead resting against his neck again, this time with a sense of urgency I hadn't felt before. "I can't stay," I whispered. "I know I can't." He didn't respond, not in any way that could be measured. But his breathing didn't change. He didn't pull away. He didn't tense. He let me have the moment. That felt like a gift I hadn't earned. I straightened slowly, my hand lingering longer than necessary. The space between us returned, and I felt it immediately a hollow opening where warmth had been. I hated it. The latch felt colder than before as I reached for it. Louder, too. Every sound felt amplified now, like the stable had sharpened its senses along with mine. "I'll be back," I said, the promise slipping out before I could stop it. "Tomorrow. I mean it." Promises were dangerous things. I'd learned that the hard way. But this one felt different. Less like an obligation, more like a tether. I stepped out of the stall and closed the door gently, watching him through the slats. He stayed where he was, head lowered, eyes following me with that same quiet awareness. The walk back down the aisle felt longer than before. The shadows seemed to shift as I passed, stretching and recoiling like living things. My heart didn't slow until I reached the front doors and pushed them open into the cold night air. The sky was fully dark now, stars sharp and indifferent overhead. The wind cut through my jacket, grounding me in my body again, reminding me that I was alone after all. But the feeling didn't settle the way it usually did. As I locked the barn behind me, hands shaking slightly, I realized something unsettling and profound. I wasn't leaving him behind in that stable. I was leaving a part of myself with him, and I didn't know if I'd ever be able to take it back. I stood there longer than necessary, the cold seeping through the soles of my boots, the lock heavy in my hand like a verdict. The barn loomed behind me, quiet again, as if nothing inside it had shifted. As if I hadn't just crossed some invisible line I couldn't uncross. The drive home passed in fragments, headlights cutting through darkness, radio static, the hum of tires on empty roads. My thoughts refused to line up into anything coherent. They circled instead, always pulling back toward the same image, moonlight on straw, the warmth under my palm, the way his eye had followed me without accusation. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it was shallow and restless, filled with half-formed dreams of standing in doorways, unable to decide which side of them I belonged on. Morning arrived pale and too bright. I woke with the sense that something had already happened without me, that time had moved while I wasn't looking. The air felt thinner, charged. I dressed quickly, skipping breakfast, the memory of the stable tugging at me with an urgency that bordered on need. I told myself I was being dramatic, that it was just a horse, just a night, just my mind filling silence with meaning because that's what it had always done best. But my hands shook as I turned the key in the ignition. The barn was louder during the day, alive. Sunlight poured through the high windows, illuminating dust motes that danced lazily in the air. Voices echoed. Buckets clanged. Horses nickered, impatient and expectant. Normalcy pressed in from all sides. I felt like an intruder. I moved through my usual routine on autopilot, nodding at people, exchanging the bare minimum of words. My eyes kept drifting down the aisle, pulled toward the far end where shadow lingered even at noon. His stall. I waited longer than I needed to, finished tasks that didn't require finishing, found reasons to be anywhere else. Fear had shifted overnight, less sharp, more insidious. Fear of being disappointed. Fear of discovering that what I'd felt had only existed because of darkness and isolation. When I finally forced myself to walk down the aisle, my pulse thudded in my ears. He was there. Of course he was. Standing in the same quiet posture, head lowered, one ear angled toward the world, the other toward the space he occupied. The sight of him sent a rush of relief through me so strong it made my knees weak. He lifted his head when he saw me. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough. Recognition bloomed in my chest, sudden and fierce. I hadn't imagined it. The night hadn't invented him. "Hey," I whispered, the words slipping out before I could stop it. I didn't open the stall right away. I leaned against the door instead, letting the familiarity of the space wash over me in daylight. The smells were the same, the textures, but something else lingered too, a residue of the quiet we'd shared. I opened the latch. This time, when I stepped inside, he took a single step toward me. It wasn't much, barely a movement, but it shattered something open inside my chest. I closed my eyes and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "I came back," I said softly, like I said I would. Promises, dangerous things, but this one held. The days that followed settled into a rhythm I hadn't planned but couldn't deny. I found excuses to linger near his stall, to volunteer for tasks that brought me close. I learned the subtle language of his body, the way his ears spoke before his muscles did, the shift in his weight that meant uncertainty rather than defiance. He learned me too. He learned that sudden movements made my shoulders tense, that loud noises sharpened my breath, that I needed a moment before touch felt safe, even when I was the one reaching out. We met each other in the middle. People noticed. Eventually. They always do when something quiet becomes steady. "He seems different," someone remarked one afternoon as they passed. "Calmer." I smiled non-committally, not trusting my voice. I wanted to tell them that so was I, but not everything changed gently. There were nights I stayed too long again, pushing past closing hours, telling myself I'd leave after just one more minute. There were moments when the weight of the bond pressed too hard, when I felt myself slipping into him, the way I'd slipped into other forms of escape before. I caught myself once, leaning against his shoulder with my eyes closed, the world narrowed down to the rise and fall of his breath. That scared me. Dependence has a smell. I know it now. It smells like comfort turning sharp around the edges. I pulled back after that. For a while, I kept my visits shorter, more controlled. I reminded myself that he was not mine to need, that I was not entitled to take solace without giving structure in return. The tension between us shifted, not breaking but stretching, he noticed. Horses always do. He grew restless when I approached, unsure which version of me would arrive, the grounded presence or the guarded retreat. One evening, the sky threatening rain, everything came to a head. The barn was nearly empty. A storm brewed outside, thunder rolling low and distant. The air felt electric, heavy with expectation. I found him pacing his stall, agitation clear in every line of his body. His ears flicked back and forth, his breathing faster than usual. I felt the echo of it immediately. Anxiety recognizes its own. "It's okay," I said, stepping inside without thinking. "I'm here." Lightning flashed, illuminating the stall in stark white for a heartbeat. He startled hard, muscles jumping, hooves scraping against the wood. Fear surged through me, not of him, but of losing him to the moment, of failing him. I moved closer, slower this time, speaking softly, grounding both of us in the sound of my voice. My hand found his neck, steady and warm, and I stayed there, no matter how my heart raced. The thunder cracked louder, closer. He pressed into me without realizing it, seeking the same anchor I was. That was the moment I understood the truth I'd been circling since the first night. This bond wasn't about saving him. It was about learning how to stand without collapsing into each other. I adjusted my stance, feet firm, body present but not clinging. I breathed deep, slower, offering calm without demanding return. He followed, gradually, the tension draining from him like water finding its level. The storm passed. When the rain finally softened to a whisper against the roof, we stood in the aftermath. Both of us changed in ways that felt subtle but irreversible. I rested my forehead briefly against his, then stepped back. "Thank you," I whispered. Not because he'd comforted me, but because he'd trusted me enough to let me try. Change came, as it always does, whether you invite it or not. A family arrived one morning, quiet and careful, eyes full of hope and hesitation. They walked the barn with the same reverence I'd felt that first night. They stopped at his stall. I watched from a distance. My chest tight, my hands cold. I saw the way he assessed them, the way he waited. The red tag disappeared. Paperwork followed. Conversations. Decisions made without ceremony. I stood in his stall one last time that evening, the barn quiet again, the light fading toward dusk. The familiarity felt heavier now, weighted with the knowledge of ending. "You're going to be okay," I told him, my voice steady despite the ache spreading through me. "You're not temporary anymore." I didn't tell him what he'd been to me. I didn't need to. Some truths don't belong to words. I rested my hand against his neck, memorizing the warmth, the rhythm, letting the moment exist without trying to keep it. When I closed the stall door, I didn't look back. The night air greeted me outside, cool and clear. The sky glowed faintly with stars, the same ones that had watched me lock the barn weeks before. I realized then that the mistake hadn't been staying alone in the stable after dark. The mistake would have been leaving without learning anything. I walked away lighter than I'd arrived, carrying the quiet strength of a bond that had taught me how to stand, how to stay, and how to let go without losing myself. And for the first time in a long while, the silence didn't feel empty. The silence didn't feel empty, but it wasn't finished with me either. Weeks passed, enough time for routines to reassert themselves, for the barn to absorb the absence of one body and make room for another. Horses came and went. New names appeared on stall doors. Life, relentless and practical, moved forward. I did too, or at least I learned how to look like I was moving. I stopped lingering after dark. I kept my phone in my pocket instead of my locker. I answered when people spoke to me instead of nodding and disappearing into my head. From the outside, it probably looked like healing, like progress. Inside, something quieter was happening. There were moments, small, unannounced ones, when my chest would tighten without warning. when a certain angle of light would hit the straw just right, or when the barn settled into that low, evening hush. My body remembered before my mind did. It always had. I never went to his stall again. Not because I wasn't allowed to, but because I understood the difference between honoring something and reopening it. Some bonds don't want revisiting. They want carrying. One afternoon, long after the family had taken him home, I received a message from the barn manager. A simple update. He was doing well, adjusting, gaining weight, calm with the children. Steady. The word stayed with me, steady. I sat on a wooden fence at the edge of the property and let the wind move through me. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I just breathed, slow and deep, the way I'd learned to. That night, alone in my apartment, I realized something else had shifted. I wasn't afraid of the quiet anymore. It still held weight. Silence always does. But it no longer felt like a threat waiting to swallow me whole. It felt like space open, neutral, honest. A place where thoughts could land without breaking. I began to notice how often I'd filled silence before. With noise, with work, with people who didn't really see me but kept me distracted enough not to notice that I wasn't seeing myself either. The stable had taught me something simple and brutal. Presence is not passive. It requires choice. It asks you to stay awake inside your own skin. I started choosing differently. I stayed in conversations longer, even when they got uncomfortable. I let pauses exist without rushing to smooth them over. I stopped apologizing for needing time, for needing quiet, for needing distance. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, I felt my footing strengthen. One evening, months later, a storm rolled in unexpectedly. Thunder echoed across the sky, sharp and immediate. I stood by my window, watching rain streak down the glass, and felt the old reflex stir in my chest. The urge to brace, to shrink, to prepare for impact. Instead, I grounded myself. Feet on the floor, breath steady, shoulders relaxed. I whispered, "It's okay," into the empty room. And I meant it. I thought of him then, not as he had been in the dark stall, or under the moonlight, or trembling at the edge of fear, but as he was now, somewhere else, in a different rhythm, living his life without needing me. The thought didn't hurt the way it once might have. It felt right. I understood, finally, that the bond we shared hadn't been about permanence. It had been about timing, about two solitary beings intersecting long enough to remind each other how to breathe. Some connections are bridges. You don't live on them, you cross. I turned away from the window and let the storm rage without me. Later, when the rain softened and the world exhaled, I sat in the quiet and listened to the building settling, to the distant city hum, to my own heartbeat. It was steady, not because nothing could shake it, but because I knew how to stand when something did. And that knowledge, the quiet, unglamorous strength of it, was the thing I carried forward. Not the memory of a horse in a dark stable, but the lesson he'd left behind. That even in the deepest quiet, even when you think you're alone, connection is possible. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is stay long enough to learn who you are, and strong enough to leave when it's time. Time kept moving, but now I moved with it instead of against it. There were days when the memory of the stable returned not as a scene, but as a feeling, a subtle alignment inside my chest, the sense of being upright without effort. I noticed it most when I was tired, when the old instincts crept back in and tried to tell me that retreat was safer than presence. On those days, I didn't fight the feeling. I acknowledged it. I let it sit beside me, the way I once stood beside him, neither forcing nor fleeing. The urge would soften eventually, dissolving into something manageable, something human. I learned that resilience isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with grand gestures or dramatic turning points. It's quiet, repetitive, built in moments so small they almost feel insignificant while you're living them. Like choosing to wake up early and walk without headphones, letting the world sound the way it actually sounds. Like standing still when an argument doesn't go the way you hoped, trusting yourself not to disappear. Like recognizing loneliness without letting it define you. The barn remained part of my life, but its hold on me changed. It became a place of work again, of routine and responsibility. The magic didn't vanish, it simply settled deeper, no longer demanding attention, just offering it when I needed reminding. Sometimes I passed his old stall and felt a faint warmth there, like sunlight lingering after sunset. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. The lesson had already taken root. One evening, long after the seasons had turned, I found myself back at the edge of dusk. The sky was the same bruised purple, the air carrying that familiar hush. For a brief moment, the past brushed close enough to touch. I smiled. Not because I missed the pain, but because I respected it. I understood now that fear had never been the enemy. It had been a signal asking me to pay attention, to choose consciously instead of reacting automatically. The stable after dark hadn't been a mistake. It had been an initiation. Into stillness, into responsibility, into myself. As night settled, I locked up and stepped outside, breathing in the cool air. The stars appeared one by one, indifferent and beautiful. I felt small beneath them, but not fragile, just human. I walked away without looking back, not because I was afraid of what I'd find, but because I no longer needed proof of who I'd become. Some bonds don't follow you through life. They shape how you walk through it. And that, I finally understood, was more than enough.